Hello again. This is Michael Broussard, author and performer of Ask a Sex Abuse Survivor, an interactive theatrical show about my experiences as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Before today's video, I want to offer a trigger warning to my fellow survivors. I'm about to talk about abuse and grooming. I also want to say again that I am not offering medical advice. I am not a medical professional. I am simply sharing my experience as a survivor. Now, my biological father, he left before I was old enough to speak. He left before I was old enough to remember him in any meaningful way. So the man who was essentially my father, who served that role, was my stepfather. There's a line in the Cat Stevens song, Father and Son. From the moment I could speak, I was ordered to listen. That is essentially the relationship I had with the man who was acting as my father. My father told me I was useless, told me I was stupid, reminded me every time I screwed up how stupid I was. And in addition, he beat me physically. So he beat me down emotionally, physically, spiritually. And then he started grooming me so I'd be compliant, so he could start raping me, which he did over and over again. When I told my mother eventually about what was happening to me, she initially kicked him out of the house. But not too long after that, she invited him back to take me alone for child visits. So now that she knew that he was raping me, she handed me back to him so he could do it again. So understandably, at that point in my life, I had no trust for parents, for adults. I didn't believe in the concept of good parents, of loving and supportive parents. I know they exist now, but they certainly didn't exist in my life. I had no such thing. The man who was supposed to teach me how to be a responsible adult, how to be a caring adult, how to be a strong adult, was intentionally grooming me to be weak and compliant, was intentionally making me feel like I was nothing, was training me that my only purpose in life was to be there for his pleasure, regardless of the depth of my pain. So I grew up thinking that parents were people who put pain into you. Parents were people who hurt you and betrayed you. That's the kind of relationship that I had with the people in my life who were supposed to take care of me. A few years back, more than a few years back, I managed to get a hold of my biological father. And we talked a few times on the phone, exchanged a few letters, some pictures, that sort of thing. And not long after that, he died. So I lost something I never really had. I never had a father. I never had a mother. My mother, as I got older, I would say about her, my mother loved babies. She didn't like children. As soon as we get old enough to disagree with her, she was done with us, and she'd have another baby. She got increasingly violently abusive, terrorized me. There's a common saying that you can't run away from your problems because wherever you go, it's still you. You're still with yourself. Your problems are with you because you're still there. But I want to add an asterisk to that, at least in my case. Sure, you can't run away from your problems, but when you're in an atmosphere where you're berated and bullied constantly, where you're beaten, where there's so much toxicity around you that you can't see any kind of life beyond being abused, it's healthy to get out of that. I did get out of that. I was fortunate that the first person I told about the abuse as an adult, a friend of mine that I met through Doctor Who conventions, at a Doctor Who convention, I told her about the abuse, and I told her about the home life that I had and how horrible things were for me. And I told her about the fact that, when I walked out the front door, I still saw all the same bullies who bullied me when I was in school. They were still in town, and they were still bullies. So I was still walking down the street with a big target on my back, still being bullied as an adult by the same bullies I'd grown up with in school. And I was still being bullied at home and abused at home. And I was still fighting with family members for the truth of what had happened to me. I was still being disbelieved. I was still being shouted down. So when a friend said, if you want to get out of all that toxicity, if you want to come and stay with me a few states away, will you get on your feet? Well, I took that opportunity to escape, and it was the best thing I could ever do, because honestly, surrounded by all that oppressive, smothering, toxic, abusive bullying, I probably would have never risen above it. I had to have an open, free atmosphere around me so I could take some deep breaths, get some air, and start to look at a different kind of life and a different way of understanding myself and a different way of understanding the world. A world that wasn't all bullying and abuse and terror and sadness. I had tried to escape a few years earlier with no one waiting for me at the other end. I ran all the way across the country. And the reality is I ended up in the street and I nearly starved to death. And I had to put my head down and beg to come home and take more of the abuse because I was terrified that I would starve to death otherwise. So yeah, they say you can't run away from your problems. But in my case, I had to get away from a world of constant abuse in order to start to heal. And I was fortunate that someone gave me the opportunity and a safe place I could go to. Thank you, and I'll talk to you again soon.